Hey, today from the Coop, I want to share a story with you. But first, I want to show you or introduce you to Robin. She is one of my new Easter eggers that I brought down here to introduce to the regular flock. But she is absolutely beautiful. She's like no other Easter egger color I've ever seen. She's sort of like a rusty color, but she has a dark head. Beautiful. But today I want to share a little golden book with you. And little golden book was created in 1942, and the storybooks that they sold were only 25 cents. But Walt Disney, being the creative genius that he was, in 1944 combined forces with the little golden books, and they were very, very successful. But the book that I'm going to share today was the very, very, very first book that Walt Disney did, and it was called Through the Picture Frame. And the book was it was published in 1944, but it was adapted by a man named Robert Edmunds, and Walt Disney Studios was the one who illustrated the book. But it's taken from an old folk tale story called Old Lukoie. And Old Lukoie is, he's like the character, the Sandman. That's where they get it from. It was written in 1841 by Hans Christian Andersen, and that's where he gets the character from. The Sandman, back in the old days, he used to sprinkle sweet milk in the eyes of sleepy children to help them sleep better. And then it went on to being sand, and in the old Lukoie, he has two umbrellas. One umbrella is for the good children who get, when he opens it, they see beautiful, beautiful pictures, and they dream beautiful, beautiful dreams. And the naughty children, they get the umbrella opened with no pictures, and they do not get the gift of dreams as they sleep. In the old Lukoie story that Hans Christian Andersen wrote, there's a character, and he's also in this story. He is the Black Horseman. Well, the Black Horseman is old Lukoie's brother, and he is also named Old Lukoie. But he represents, or he is death. But that's a whole other story. We're not going to get into that one. I'm going to tell you the good story, the good fairy tale. And that is Through the Picture Frame. But me and Robin hope you enjoy Through the Picture Frame. She's so pretty. Walt Disney's Through the Picture Frame, adapted by Robert Edmunds from the Hans Christian Andersen story Old Lukoie, illustrated by the Walt Disney Studio. It was Hyomer's bedtime. He gathered up all of his toys and he put them neatly away in the big cupboard. Then he yawned sleepily and hopped into bed. Hardly had he closed his eyes when the window was pushed slowly open, and a funny little old man with long white whiskers and spindly legs came into the room. He carried an enormous umbrella. He tiptoed over to Hyomer's bed and peered at him over the edge of the covers. He muttered. Everything's in order. He's asleep on time, and his room's neat and tidy. Hyomer opened one eye. Who are you? He said wonderingly. I'm Old Lukoie, the little old man answered in a small, rusty voice. Get ready if you want to go. Hyomer was wide awake now. He began to understand. Old had come to take him on an adventure. Where are we going? He cried excitedly. Old Lukoie looked around the room. On the wall, in a gilt frame, was a picture of tall trees and a winding river that ran through green meadows. That will do, said the little old man. Then he flipped open his umbrella and held the handle towards Hyomer. Hang on, he cried. No sooner had Hyomer gripped the handle than he found himself being whisked across the room through the frame and into the middle of the picture. He was standing in the meadow. A warm breeze rustled the top of the tall trees, and a little red boat with silver sails bobbed up and down at the water's edge. As Hyomer stepped into the boat, it glided noiselessly
away over the smooth water. Gilly-colored birds flew above him. They flapped their wings so close to him that the breeze helped fill the sails, and the boat sped along even faster. Hyomer looked down into the water. There were hundreds of fishes with scales of silver and gold swimming after him. They were the most beautiful fishes he had ever seen. They would leap right out of the water, turn a fancy somersault, then dive back in again. They seemed to enjoy it. While Hyomer was watching all these wonderful things, a mermaid came shimmering to the surface and clung to the side of the boat. She swished her tail gracefully and smiled up at him. In her hand she held a garland of seaweed. She reached over and dropped it around Hyomer's neck. Hyomer blushed. He tried to thank her, but somehow the words just wouldn't come out. Other mermaids were swimming around the boat now. One of them sang a soft note, and suddenly the air was filled with music so sweet that the nightingales in the far-off woods stopped to listen. Past mossy banks speckled with primroses and violets, under the shady brow of drooping willows, then out into the open again, and over a gleaming waterfall sailed the little boat. There were tiny islands dotted about, glowing with brilliant colored flowers. Here and there tall castles rose up, reflecting their beauty in the water. They were made of glass and burnished gold. Just as Hyomer passed under the golden bridge, he noticed a lonely gray tower standing at the water's edge. I wonder who lives there, he thought. If you're really interested, I could tell you, whispered a small voice behind him. Hyomer looked round and saw a funny little green and yellow frog sitting in the stern of the boat. It wouldn't do you any good to know, the frog went on. And it wouldn't do me any good to tell you either, because if the black horseman found out that I had given away his secret, he would turn me into a stone. With that, he let out a frightened croak, hopping back into the water, and disappeared. Now, locked up in a room in the top of the tower was a beautiful princess. Her only companion was a snow-white pigeon. Day after day, the princess sat weeping and waiting for someone to rescue her from the black horseman who held her captive. She looked through the bars of her little window and saw Hyomer. He was gazed up in her direction. The princess hastily scribbled a note and gave it to the pigeon. "Deliver this to him at once," she whispered hopefully. "He may be the prince who has come to save me." In a twinkling, the snow-white pigeon was winging its way down towards Hyomer, far below. It dropped the message at his feet. Hyomer picked it up and read it. "A princess in distress," he exclaimed. "I must go to her rescue." "It won't be at all easy," said the pigeon, who had perched himself beside him. "As a matter of fact, it's against all the rules for anyone but a real prince to rescue a princess." "What does it matter who rescues her?" said Hyomer. "A maiden in distress is a maiden in distress." "Well, now that you put it like that," said the pigeon, "I'm inclined to agree with you. If you are really quite sure you want to go on this adventure, I think I can manage the details." "Of course I'm sure," answered Hyomer bravely. Then the snow-white pigeon muttered some magic words, and Hyomer was suddenly surprised to see that he was dressed like a prince. A sword hung from his waist. Before he could say a word, he found himself mounted on a noble horse, charging full tilt towards the tower. Straight through the heavy walls plunged horse and rider. Hyomer shut his eyes as massive stones came tumbling down all around him. It was dark inside the tower, but Hyomer wasn't a bit afraid. He rode in and out of the big hall, searching for the staircase that led up to the princess's prison room. The clatter of the horse's hoof on the marble floors echoed like claps of thunder throughout the tower. There must be some way to get to the top of the tower, thought Hyomer. At one end of the long hall, hung with ornaments made of spun gold, Hyomer came to a door. It was studded with precious gems, so dazzling that he could hardly bear to look at it. The door was as high as the ceiling and as thick as the heavy stones on which it was hinged. Hyomer dismounted, drew his trusty sword, and struck at the door with all his might. Immediately it flew open. The sparkling jewels changed into bluebirds and flew happily around Hyomer's head, singing songs of the forest. I must have broken the spell that held them prisoner, Hyomer thought. Now I will find the princess and release her. He walked towards a narrow, winding stairway that led up to the top of the tower. A loud hissing noise came from somewhere behind him. The air became hot and smelled of strong sulfur. "Ah, I've been expecting you," wheezed a low, howling voice. Hyomer turned quickly and saw that he was face to face with a terrible dragon. It was snorting with rage. Hyomer drew his sword and rushed at the dragon. Down came the sword. There was a blinding flash, followed by a great puff of white smoke. When the smoke cleared away, the dragon was sitting down, purring like a kitten and smiling. "I feel so much better now, thanks to you," the dragon said. "Won't you have something to eat?" Popcorn popped out of his nostrils into a basket filled with butter, which was hung around his neck. Huge slices of chocolate cake and dishes of ice cream were stacked on shelves along his back. Ice-cold lemonade poured out of his ears. "Help yourself," said the dragon. "It's all free." Hyomer was tempted to stop and eat, but he thought of the little princess locked in the tower. "I can't stop now," Hyomer said. "I have to rescue the princess." He ran up the winding stairway. At the top he saw a fearsome black horseman, his spear raised high. Hyomer bravely grabbed the spear out of one hand and pulled the horseman to the ground. With a terrific crash, the black horseman broke into 1,000 little pieces on the stone floor. Hyomer rushed past him into the tower room, and the happy princess flung herself into his arms. "We must get out of here at once," Hyomer said. He seated the princess on his horse, leaped into the saddle, and dashed away. Out into the night flew the gallant charger. Over the treetops, over the roofs of the houses they sailed. "At last I am rescued," said the princess so joyfully. "Hold on tight," cried Hyomer over his shoulder. "I will return you safely to your father, the king." Hyomer reined up his horse as he saw the royal palace, like a tiny speck far below. Down, down, down they sailed until the horse finally came to a stop right outside the palace gates. The captain of the guard came out and met them. "Halt! Who goes there?" he demanded curtly. When Hyomer told him who he was and that he had rescued the king's daughter, all the soldiers threw their hats in the air and cheered. Then they formed a guard of honor and marched with Hyomer and the princess into the palace and right up to the throne where the king sat. As soon as the king saw the princess, he rushed up to her and embraced her fondly, weeping with joy. He was so happy that he proclaimed a day of national rejoicing and ordered all the flags in the kingdom to be flown for a whole week. The king turned to Hyomer. "You shall be justly rewarded for your brave deed," he said. Taking out his brightly jeweled sword, he tapped Hyomer gently upon each shoulder and said, "I dub thee knight. Arise, Sir Hyomer." Then followed the royal celebration in Hyomer's honor. The circus grounds were ablaze with colored lanterns. Merry-go-rounds whirled, bands played. Everybody sang and danced to the stirring music. The princess danced with Hyomer. On came the parade. There were clowns, performing elephants, jugglers, cowboys. Never was there such excitement. Afterward, Hyomer rode back to the palace between the king and the princess in a golden coach. The king stood in the palace doorway and clapped his hands. Instantly, 100 cooks appeared. "They are yours to command," the king told Hyomer. "Please bake me the largest cake you've ever baked with frosting 6 inches deep," Hyomer said. And so Hyomer feasted in the royal banquet hall. He sat next to the princess. He had such a wonderful time that he hoped it would never end. But it was getting late. Hjalmar's boat was waiting for him at the dock. He thanked the king and kissed the princess on the cheek, then started back. Along canals he sailed, between houses that were fast asleep. Some of them were snoring heavily in great gusty breaths. With each snore they blew the little boat along faster until it left behind it a trail of white foam. Suddenly the white foam turned into soft, billowy clouds, and the bubbles became stars. Hjalmar was sailing through the sky. As he drew near to one big star, he heard music coming from within. 3 little angels were singing out of hymn books. Hjalmar thought they were the sweetest voices he had ever heard. He looked over at the bright moon that hung like a huge yellow lantern in the sky. Someone was standing on a ladder, polishing its face. Hjalmar walked over towards it to see who it could be. It was old Lukoie. "I didn't expect to see you here," said Hjalmar. "I'm always here at this time of night," replied Ole. "If I didn't keep the moon and the stars polished, nobody would ever see them at all. They get rusty so quickly out in the damp night air." "There must be millions of stars in the sky," Hjalmar said. "I wonder you have time to finish them all before morning." "It keeps me pretty busy," Ole agreed. "The stars aren't so bad. I can do them 2 at a time. But polishing this moon is hard work. Sometimes when I get a little behind, I don't have time to finish it at all. That's why you often see only part of it shining." Hjalmar stepped back to admire the brilliant shine Ole was putting on the moon's face. As he did so, his foot slipped off the edge of the cloud, and he tumbled headlong into space. Down through the layer upon layer of fleecy clouds he fell. He saw the top of his house coming up at him. He braced himself, then crash! Hjalmar sat up. He was right back in the middle of the picture frame. He looked into the room. Ole was already there. He was arguing with the portrait of Hjalmar's great-grandfather on the wall. "Disgraceful, I call it," his great-grandfather was saying, wagging his finger angrily at Ole. "You're old enough to know better than to take a little boy out of his bed and keep him out most of the night. And you're old enough to know that every little boy in the world loves to come with me on an adventure," Ole shot back. With that, he snatched up his umbrella and he stalked out of the window. Hjalmar was so sleepy as he sat dangling his legs over the edge of the picture frame that he paid little attention to the argument. He yawned, then climbed out of the frame and slipped quietly back into bed. In 2 minutes, he was sound asleep. The end.
Me and Robin hope that you enjoy it. This right here is a new, wait, Robin. You're so sweet. In 18